All right, and we are live.
All right. Hotep, peace. Greetings to all. Of course, family, this is another Tuesday morning with Black Conversations with Melaneyes Media. My name is Baba Aundar Ma'at. I'm the co-founder of Melaneyes Media. And of course, we always appreciate the opportunity to come to you and share with you some information, some thoughts and ideas centered around the Black experience. And of course, this morning, we're going to have a great conversation and want to just invite you to be a part of that conversation. Of course, we're going to just be talking about, as always, connected to our history. But from there, family, I just wanted to, of course, my brother and my business partner and friend, he's going to guide us through this conversation. And we're just going to just talk to each other. And I think that's always important. And you know, it's interesting, brother. We just say conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we need, just sometimes sitting and having a conversation about things that are important to us. So you can go ahead and introduce yourself and we can get started, brother, when you're ready.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Baba Aundar. Peace and greetings, family. Thank you all for joining us. Once again, these Tuesday morning conversations started at 10:30 this morning. But that's all right. We just had to readjust, but we are definitely here. And so we would always, encourage you all to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is something that we're striving to do on a weekly basis, just to be able to have a conversation, like the brother said, and really just be able to engage with you all. So whether you watch this now or later, just know that on our YouTube channel, Melaneyes Media Conversations, there is a playlist where you can go back and watch previous episodes.
No doubt.
And with that being said, I'm going to switch to my screen share. Can you see that, Baba Aundar?
I can, my brother. Now I do have I see the
controls.
Yeah. There you go. That'll work then. You pulled it down, so it's clear.
Okay. Let me see if I can get rid of that a little bit. With my screen share. But in the meantime, family, we're going to have a conversation about the Griot. Griots, depending on how you choose to pronounce it. And so since the 13th century, when griots originated from the West African Mandi Empire of Mali, they remain today as storytellers, musicians, praise singers, and oral historians of their communities. And I think that's a really good place to start, because a lot of times our tradition, our stories, our history takes on a form of stories, of music. It's oral in nature. And so with that being said, I think it's many different ways that we as a people here in North America still carry on this tradition of the griot, of being historians of our communities, of our families, storytellers to some degree. When you think about this, what comes to mind for you, Baba Aundar?
A few things, brother. You know, first of all, I just thought it was important that this profession was even developed, in the sense that, I mean, we have storytellers, as you just spoke of, in our families, in our communities. We're just people that tell stories, you know, as we sit around the kitchen table or sit around the campfire or sit somewhere together as a family in a community. We told stories. But I thought one of the first things was that they established this as a profession, meaning that they saw the importance and value in it and wanted to make sure that the history through songs or through poetry, some kind of presentation was shared with the families and communities of that nation. So I thought that was important, because, I mean, we as a people, we know the importance of, I think we're learning more and more the importance of documenting our story and telling our story. And many times that story is transferred and, transmitted through the oral tradition. I would make a note, though, and I think this is always important, family. This is part of our great tradition, the oral tradition of sharing our history. But we also are people who have and developed a written tradition. So and we have that also as part of our legacy as African people, writing some of the original texts that people can go back and look at. But I think the Griot here, brother, just the fact that we had people who was trained in this profession, then actually had a calling or responsibility to share that information when the communities came together, was just so important. And I think it's something that ultimately we have maintained to a certain degree. And I think it's something that's more and more being recognized as far as the importance of it. And I think more and more people are starting to embrace it and to build on this tradition of telling stories, if it's through, through the rap or through different forms, presentations, but always trying to maintain that continuity. And that means sharing our history from one generation to the next. And I think the Griot is a great example for us.
Indeed. For me, myself, I don't know if I knew this word or this position in culture before I read Roots by Alex Haley. And for me, that was a great visual, because in the story, at the end of the book, he really goes into how he got the story of his family and of his lineage. And I remember vividly him telling the story of how he traveled back to the continent, went to the different villages, met with different tribesmen and different people to try to find his own personal history and lineage. And so I remember him vividly painting the picture of sitting there listening, meeting with the Griot there, going through all of the family history. And I remember him basically saying that he sat there and went through so many different histories and generations until he finally heard names and things that were familiar to him that was relative to his ancestors. And so that always stuck with me, and that kind of helped give me a visual just from reading that. And I always took up interest in the position of the griot ever since then, because I always thought about how amazing that was, that somebody could not only memorize all of the lineages, the names, the dates and things of that nature, but then to recite it and then be able to pass it on. Because once again, this was a position that a person was trained for. Just like we have an apprenticeship for a carpenter or a blacksmith, these individuals were trained, and this was a skill set passed on to the next generation so that these stories and this history would not be lost. So if we take that mentality, if we take that concept and we understand today, we have many different mediums for capturing stories, telling stories. However, it's nothing like the oral tradition of being able to talk to someone, being able to speak to someone and listen. And I think we should all train and teach our children how important it is to sit down and listen to the elders and listen to the stories. I also appreciate how, even here in the definition, they have storytellers, musicians, praise singers, because all of those things, all of those oral arts can be used to manifest a story. We often think of music when we hear musicians and we think about the lyrics. And I know you mentioned rap and hip hop, which is a great way, even though people may not always use it for that. I know from myself growing up, I definitely learned a lot and heard a lot of great stories in rhyme form, whether they be written, whether it be poetry to music, even songs from some of our great musicians. I often listen to Sam Cooke, A Change Gonna Come, and it just paints such a picture for me. And so the stories can be in our singing, in our poetry, in our films, in our books. But the real point, I think, really is to try to not only pass on the history or the story, but the wisdom that goes along with it, the lessons that can be learned, the jewels, the understanding from listening to certain stories and tales.
Now, you said quite a bit, my brother, and I agree with it. And I think that is the true value of the Griot. And I think one of the things that you just mentioned just brought me back. One way I really had picked up on our history was listening to what I consider to be griots, and that is the Gil Scott Heron, the Last Poets, some of the, more current, say rappers, hip hop artists are just, but they was reciting the history, and I think that has been a valuable way in which we have shared our history. And you just highlighted a number of different ways that, of course, I think we have captured our history and shared it. But the other thing that you, I think, brought up for me was the understanding of this oral tradition and the importance of not only just the storyteller, but the listeners, because the idea is that we had to be good listeners as a family and as a community. It's one thing to have the griot sitting there telling you the story or entertaining you, but it's another thing to have people who are open and receptive and listening and receiving that word and message and information that would be of great value to them. And I think it really speaks to now a day and time where sometimes we may have someone who's sharing something with us, but I don't know if we always really understand the importance of being open to listening and learning. And when you had just mentioned the idea of just sitting with the elders, and this is something that has, in many ways, have been part of our tradition, is sitting with our elders, listening to their stories as they grew up or something that was passed to them. And because it was a way for us to learn from their history, in order that there's some things that we can capture and utilize in our own lives, or some things that we learned from that we knew not to go down that path. But the idea is that we listen to our elders, and this was part of this whole thing with the griot, is that we had to be good listeners, open to learning through that tradition of, that oral tradition.
When I look at this second paragraph and it says, theirs is a service based on preserving the genealogies, historical narratives, and oral traditions of their people. Mm-hmm. And as such, have for centuries retold the history of the empire, thus keeping their history and traditions alive. One thing that stood out to me was genealogies and historical narratives, because once again, the stories have lessons within them, even our own personal stories. A lot of history is wrapped up and injected into what we consider fables. So sometimes we hear stories, it may be of animals, of past figures, and we think they're just fables. And a lot of times it's actually based on actual historical precedents, things that have really happened. The other thing is genealogies, because I can only speak for myself. I didn't necessarily grow up with a book of all of my aunts and uncles and my grandparents, and that thing's kind of laid out for me. However, I did take some time as I got older to at least strive to speak to at least my grandmother, who was my oldest living relative, and just try to understand more about her mom, her mom's mom, and things of that nature, and my great grandfather and my great grandmother. However, one thing that I did want to do for my son when he was born, I actually went and spoke to my paternal grandmother, who I didn't necessarily grow up with, didn't really have a relationship with her. However, I really wanted to speak with her just to get as much history as I possibly could from her, because once again, I didn't necessarily grow up with her, but I still wanted to know more of my lineage, so at least I could pass it down to my son. And I think that's important for us as a family, just not to know who we're related to, but even some of the stories that can help us remember who people are from our own personal histories.
And I think that I agree, brother. That is a great value. And it just sparked a memory for me, because many times I found myself sitting at the feet of my great grandmother, grandmother, my uncles, but people who was willing to share information with me and learning from their experiences. And I would say this, one of the things that this year, we had what we call a tribute to the ancestors, but it was really just a family gathering where we had the family come together and just talk about those who had passed recently, and of course, going back years. And it was a great way for us to capture their memory, to kind of heal the family, and to also acknowledge the things they said, the contributions they had made to the family and to the world. And now we have something, and we recorded some of it in the sense of being able to now preserve it and share it with the future generation. And the beautiful thing also about it was just adults there. It was the children, and the children now heard stories about Uncle John, Uncle Al, Aunt. But I'm saying now we heard these stories that we had never heard before, but it gave us a chance to remember them, reflect on them, and to pass down something that really is a part of our tradition, and that is sharing our family history, and sharing our community history. And from that, I believe it's a great way for us to heal. It's a great way for us to learn and grow in our own understanding.
Great point. Another thing too, when we speak about this, is the fact that if people, I know that I personally enjoy stories, so I never mind listening. And I know that society changes. However, I think that we can also reinvigorate not just our young people, but even older people to listen to stories and just the appreciation of language. Being a student of history, I remember learning about the Lincoln and Douglas debates that people say were historic and took place. And one of the things I noticed about the story was they were saying that people were there all day listening to them debate and talk. Like it was a literal event, and people stopped, they got lunch, came back and listened some more. And I thought to myself, man, imagine how beautiful that would be if we lived in a society where oratory skills were what we gauge people's intelligence with, and we marveled at the language and how people use the language and spar with one another for debates and thoughts. And once again, taking it to the film, The Great Debaters, I always found so much value in that film, not just from the characters, but just the young people honing their skills and practicing amongst one another, sharpening those swords, being able to handle themselves linguistically and just using the language to be able to prove a point. That was always, to me, just very amazing. And it's a skill set. And I think that one thing that I constantly think about when we talk about oral traditions is just being able to be an artist with the words, because when you're an artist in the verbal sense, then your paintbrush are the words. So having more access to more strengthening your vocabulary, knowing your parts of speech and things like that, being able to express yourself verbally is a skill set, and it may become a lost art if we don't continue to challenge people and use it and marvel at it. So I just wanted to share that too.
I really honestly believe that though in some, communities, I think this is being reclaimed and captured, this idea of the griot and the oral tradition and listening, the importance of listening. And other ways, I think it's being lost and it's endangered, because I think we're at a point in time where we are not patient enough to sit and listen long enough. We want it right now. We want to know it all in the next 2 minutes. And of course, you just mentioned in history where they may have debates the whole day and people would sit and listen. So I think it's a real challenge for us to continue to build on this tradition, but it's necessary, because for the most part, most of the things, a lot of things we learn is through what we hear. Of course, now we have this television, so it's a lot we're learning through the vision of what we see, which is also important. But the fact is that, can you imagine a time where we sit around and listen to the radio And that's how we visualize things that was taking place. And it's like, sometimes taking in and reading a book is something about being able to visualize things as someone is sharing something with you, imagining almost in a way yourself within that picture or within that story and seeing your role in it. And I think this is something of great importance for us to reclaim and restore the importance of us being able to have the griot, have the historian, if it's through the music or the storytelling, praise singer. But the fact is that also having the understanding, the importance and patience of listening. Because, and I'll say this last thing, brother, about it is that, when we was working on our film, Walk on the River, and we sat with many of the elders and they shared their stories, I was consumed by just the fact that they were sharing these stories and I could relate and learn from it. But what I also saw later on was the fact that they just appreciated the opportunity to have someone to capture these stories. We're recording it, but we're listening. So we have people who want to share their stories, who are like griots. They have this information that they want to share through the oral tradition. And then other thing was that I recall when people saw the film and how they were so moved by the fact that they could relive some of this as they listened to, these elders talk and speak about the history of the past, which is always connected to the present in many ways. And I think, again, this is an important art form, if you want to say. This is an important profession that we need to continue to build on, because ultimately, this is, for the most part, the way a lot of our history is transmitted to the next generation.
That's a great point. And I know we don't often talk about it much. We are documentary filmmakers. That's really how we got our start. And as far as Melaneyes Media, and we've sat and listened to so many people.
Yes.
And I never really get tired of it. And you have to pay close attention, because when you're telling somebody else's story, or when you're facilitating the story, you have to be careful with editing, what you choose to use, and things of that nature. So it definitely takes a keen ear, and you have to be the type of person that's humble, I think. I don't think you can do this type of work without a level of humility, to be able to let people talk, to be able to encourage people to talk, to massage people and make them feel comfortable. And I mean massage in the mental sense. However, just also to be able to take what somebody is giving you with care, and then strive to deliver it with the same care that it was given to you. And that's a level of responsibility. And that's one of the things that, drives us. That's one of the reasons why we do what we do, is because we see it as important, and ultimately because we love it and enjoy it.
No doubt.
And so that's one thing too, it's amazing, and I personally enjoy it.
Yeah, because in our conversation, one of the things that I definitely have acknowledged within you, and I think it's a part of me, is that we have, in a way, have grown up enjoying listening to people, and I know we both can sit and talk, brother, but the idea is that I think we also appreciate the fact of that we can sit and listen, we can ask questions, we can engage and learn from other people as they share with us, which again, I think is so important to this whole idea of the griot, is because, you have maybe this one person telling and sharing this information, but you have a whole community of people who are now have to be receptive and open to engaging with that information and appreciating the importance of it. And I think, of course, with technology now, we have, of course, so many other ways we can share this information beyond just a village of people coming together in a certain area. But it's still the same science is involved. And that is that you have to have people who have gathered the information, in some way have been trained, or at least have gone and done the research to get that information, and now is creating an app, a vehicle by which to transmit that information. And if it's, as you had opened up earlier, if it's through film or if it's through, music or some other, we're just trying to find creative ways in which that we can continue to preserve our history, share our narratives, and really educate ourselves about our past, which is always, the important point is that we learn from the past in order that we may gain knowledge and make better decisions as we move forward into the future. And I think, again, this was the call of the Griot. And I think it's, to some degree, I think we all are griots, because I know you share stories with your children and your family. I do likewise. So we all are trying to continue to build on this tradition of making sure that we, learn the story and share the story.
I was, when you just said that, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, just being a 5% part of the Nation of Gods and Earths. A bulk of our studies are memorized. And so we memorize a set of 120 questions and answers. And it is like a rites of passage to be able to remember them and then be able to quote them. And so we call it knowledge in 120. And so once you knowledge 120, once you learn all of your lessons, you are qualified to teach. And it made me think about when I first heard, at first I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way somebody has remembered all of these, just flipping through it, looking at it on paper. You're like, no, nobody has remembered all of this, like verbatim. Yeah. And it seems almost impossible, at least to me it did. But then when you start to go under the study and you start to train and you start to memorize one at a time, it's like mental exercise. If you start out doing 5 push-ups, after a while, you'll be able to do 10 and 15. And it literally is like mental exercise. And then once I completed it, I realized how easy it was to memorize all different types of things, dates and facts and parables and things of that nature. And so just wanted to mention that, because I think that, all of the different groups and gatherings and nations that have come from the people of North America, the original people that live here in North America, have always strived to preserve our story in different ways. I think about the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, Marcus Garvey's movement. I think that we've all done our best, especially orally, to preserve our history and tell our story.
I agree, brother. I agree. Now, you know what? Some things just jump off. No, but I agree, because I think when you just said that, I think that helps us to really value and appreciate the Griot and those who go in with the intent of learning information, memorizing information. Because, a lot of times I think we do think it's a challenge, but it's interesting how we can have young people who we feel maybe, not into reading or remembering things, but yet they can listen to lyrics and they can recite a whole song for you. And you don't realize, now this child has memorized this whole song. And the idea is that just, again, finding, knowing that it can be done, because our mind is so powerful. And then just finding the right system, the right way in which we can remember these things. And that's why I think if it was through praise singing or through the musician or through whatever, technique that was utilized, various techniques that were utilized to share the information, because people were learning in different ways. I know you're a reader. I like to read, and we read and we learn. We listen to music, we learn. We watch documentary films, we learn. And we listen to the elders, we learn. So we're all learning in these various ways. But the idea is that we have to be, knowing that we have the power and the importance of learning, and then being open to that oral tradition, because ultimately, I think that's what's going to help sustain us. If they turn off the TV, You know, if the books are all, you know, taken away, we need people who can maintain our history, the knowledge of us as a people. And that's why the Griot is so important, because they was able to do that and continue to transmit that information to the next generation. So we need griots and we need great listeners.
True. Indeed. Well, this has been an excellent conversation. The time goes so fast, it's almost hard to think that it's 30 minutes has passed.
I know that's right. Yes, sometimes I think people we hang out for a day, brother. We could be because you know, sometimes we have these conversations and it just goes, but it goes in different areas where I think I continue to learn, you know, from you and from the information that, of course, always shared with us, especially on our Sunday nights, Black History, or these Tuesday mornings. Anytime we come together, I'm always learning. And I appreciate, you know, what you share, and I appreciate what the people share with us.
And likewise, you know, always learn. And that's the thing too. I mean, I think the best students become the best teachers. And so I'm always striving to be a good student because I personally like to learn. And so when I listen and I get a chance to hear you speak on certain things, it sparks ideas and thoughts in me. And certain things I memorize when you, or I, you know, internalize when you say it. And I hope that the people that get a chance to spend time with us, whether it be on Sundays or these Tuesdays, feel the same way.
Yes, no doubt.
And with that, just want to remind you all to subscribe to our YouTube channel here on YouTube. MelaneyeMedia.com is the website if you ever want to learn more about what we do. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your ear, and we appreciate your support. And we hope that y'all have a positive and productive day.
All right. Peace and blessings.